It's a grassroots group, and she's going to tell us all about that. And I'll just, anything more, just hand it over to you.
Oh, okay. Good evening, and thank you for having me. Thank you for your interest in gun violence prevention. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I'm Laura Fletcher from Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. I'm an unpaid activist. I fall into the group that former President Obama called the proud title "We All Share," citizen. Before I talk about what Moms is doing in Philadelphia, I wanted to congratulate you on your win with the stay of execution for Marcellus Williams in Missouri. And then I know I overheard some talk a few minutes ago that there was another one. There was another stay of execution yesterday. Is that right? So I joined Moms Demand Action, and I think that you should too, because I'm interested in gun violence prevention. I strongly believe that any situation that takes the lives of 93 Americans a day and sends thousands of children per year to the ER is a national public safety issue. And I believe that American schools, churches, movie theaters, baseball fields, the street in front of your house should not be the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm also in what I consider to be the unusual American position of being both a responsible gun owner and a survivor of sorts. My husband and children are hunters, so I became a gun owner by marriage. My husband was a firearms safety instructor at one time, and I grew up with guns safely stored in the house, and as a child, it never occurred to me that other people did not do the same thing. When I was 13, my 14-year-old neighbor, Bobby Russell, was shot to death by his father, who was struggling with addiction and mental health issues, and he wanted to spare his son from the same struggle. I had no idea until that happened that could happen to anyone. When I was 16, my family was getting ready to go out for ice cream when we heard gunshots. And this is actually a different neighborhood. There was a carjacking a block away from us, and stray bullets sprayed through my very peaceful suburban neighborhood. My church choir singing librarian neighbor had a bullet fly past her face and land in her door jamb, and a child who was playing in the park had a bullet enter and exit his calf cleanly. He was 5 years old, playing in the park. And 6 years ago, gun violence affected my family when my 29-year-old cousin was shot in a robbery attempt. He sustained a C3 level spinal cord injury and remains quadriplegic. So he now requires 24-hour nursing care, and that one bullet has affected dozens of lives, from my cousin and my family, and the shooter and his family, and all the first responders who took care of him, and the medical staff who continued to take care of him. I learned from that survival does not always mean happily ever after. Now, while I was interested in gun violence prevention, my activism was confined to the occasional rally or candlelight vigil or email to my legislator, until one of my Sunday school students asked me during safety week what she's supposed to do if there's a bad guy in the hallway at the same time that there's a fire. And she was 9 at the time. So I sat in the car when I got home. I felt guilty that I hadn't done more after Columbine, and decided that if I really wanted to protect my students, I should devote my energy to making America safer for them. As former President Obama said in his farewell speech, change only happens when ordinary people get involved, get engaged, and come together to demand it. He went on to say that all this depends on our participation, on each of us accepting the responsibility of citizenship regardless of which way the pendulum of power swings, and he said, show up, dive in, and persevere. So Moms Demand Action certainly is a group that follows those instructions. I'm not sure if you've heard before, but Shannon Watts, our founder, dove in when she started a Facebook page in response to the horrible shooting tragedy at Sandy Hook. The group grew quickly in numbers and eventually became the grassroots divisions of Michael Bloomberg's Every Town for Gun Safety, joining with Mayors Against Illegal Guns, among other groups. We now have close to 4 million national members. We're a nonpartisan, single-issue, grassroots organization that respects the Second Amendment and gun owners. We're working to reduce gun violence. We call ourselves Mothers and Others, and among our members are police officers, military personnel, legislators, educators, yoga, fitness instructors, social workers, and on and on and on. We're working to be to gun safety what Mothers Against Drunk Drivers is to driver safety. So we do this in 4 ways. We work to close the deadly loopholes in our background check system. In Pennsylvania, that would be the private sale of long guns. We promote gun safety with the Be Smart Safe Gun Storage campaign. We support reasonable limits on when, where, and how loaded guns are carried and used in public places through our consumer campaigns. We've been very successful with Starbucks, Target, Facebook, and those are just a few. We work to create enforceable laws that address gun trafficking and fraudulent purchasing to keep illegal guns off our streets. And in Philadelphia, if you were anywhere near the Democratic National Convention, or attended a rally last year for a gun sense candidate, you know that we show up. According to Vice Presidential candidate Tim Kaine, these shirts were everywhere. As for perseverance, even in the current less friendly political climate, we continue to show up. This year, over 100 of us gathered in Harrisburg and headed to the Capitol to support Senate Bill 501, the bill that would require those with a protection of abuse order against them to relinquish their weapons to authorities within 24 hours, as opposed to the 60 days that they have now. Since we were there, we asked legislators not to support Senate Bill 383, which is the bill that would allow guns in schools. Since we lost that battle, but we did manage to persuade enough senators to vote against it that it didn't pass with a veto-proof majority, which was a big deal because Governor Wolf does intend to veto it if it makes it through the House. And just recently, Senator Street mentioned that because the amendment that was added, of the amendments that were added to this proposal, the NRA no longer supports it, nor do they support its partner bill in the House. So that looks like it may be a win that we won't have guns in schools. We have a campaign for educators to focus on this bill as it moves to the House. If you're an educator, we need you to join this campaign with the other 5,000 volunteers nationwide, and I need you to because my kids actually still go to public school in Pennsylvania. Both nationally and locally, we continue to write and call our legislators and ask them to vote no to the concealed carry reciprocity bill. There's some postcards right here. This bill would make all concealed carry licenses valid in all states. So that means that Pennsylvania would have to recognize the licenses issued in Texas, where you can get a concealed carry license even if you have a felony conviction and you're not legally allowed to buy a gun.
Is this bill in federal court?
It's getting there, yes. It's one of the ones that's being pushed by the current administration. Yeah. And that, the George Zimmermans of the world who have guns in Florida would be able to bring them to Pennsylvania. We also have the Be Smart for Kids Safe Gun Storage program, which is simple common sense. As we were just talking about children, there has to be smart storage if you're going to be a gun owner. Mom's Demand Action was recently successful. I'm not sure if you heard with turning Dear Abby around. She answered someone's letter who asked what should they do if they suspect that their child's friends have a firearm. Should she ask? And Dear Abby said no, that would make people uncomfortable. And Mom's Demand Action was really quick to get involved and say, no, you have to ask. And Dear Abby, kind of came on board and she published some of our letters, she apologized, she really came out for gun safety in one of her columns. So the title for Be Smart is an acronym with the letters of SMART standing for safe storage. So firearms should be stored unloaded and locked with ammunition locked in a different place. Model responsible gun ownership, always handle weapons responsibly, and model this both for children and other gun owners. I have a friend who belongs to the Westchester Gun Club, and he believes that younger gun owners that come there really learn from the responsible older members of their club. Ask your children's friends' parents if they own firearms and how they are stored. And I've done that. It can be a little awkward, but usually it's not. Usually it gets to be pretty easy. Recognize symptoms of depression. Suicide is a leading cause of death among teens and actually men at this point. And suicide attempts by gun are much more likely to be completed and end in fatality. And teach is the last letter from SMART. Teach your children responsible gun ownership. In Philadelphia, what I'm most proud of is in our local group is our survivor outreach network. For the past 2 years, we've participated along with local survivor groups in wearing orange for Gun Violence Awareness Day. Is everybody familiar with that? So you know that it's Hadia Pendleton's birthday, and she was a teenager who performed at President Obama's second inauguration and died in crossfire when she returned home in Chicago. It was an incident that had nothing to do with her. Her friends got together and chose orange to raise awareness for gun safety because that's the color that hunters wear. Last year, we recognized that day with the Survivor Picnic, and we invited local survivor groups. This year, we partnered with several of those groups, along with Ceasefire PA, the Charles Foundation, the National Homicide Justice Alliance, Operation Save Our City, and the gun violence prevention group Shoot Basketballs Not People. And we marched with the support of law enforcement from Penn Treaty Park to Liberty Lads Park, where we had another picnic. We lit up the skyline on June 2nd, Boathouse Row, the Ben Franklin Bridge, Children's Hospital, the Convention Center were among those who lit up orange for the cause. The Pico Building also ran our orange message on June 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And nationally, over 215,000 people wore orange. 600 cities and municipalities took action, and we trended nationally on social media. Our partnership with the survivor groups continues. 2 weeks ago, we met with the Pennsylvania Victims Advocate to talk about services for surviving family members of homicide victims. Unfortunately, family members don't get services unless someone has been charged. And a hearing is pending, and since the rate of solved homicides in Philadelphia is very low, some families never get services. So we had a very productive conversation. We're planning to meet again next month. We're very hopeful. We know that in DC, the NEAR Act was adopted, which works with existing community and health-based programs to reduce gun violence. I'm confident that we're going to see something similar here, whether we pass legislation or not. I think that we're going to be able to use some of the services that already exist to have more victims advocates. Because of the rate of solved homicides in Philadelphia is so low, National Homicide Justice Association has started a dialogue with the detectives unit in Philadelphia. This past Thursday, and moms participated in this, we brought breakfast to the detectives unit. So some of our local survivors got to meet the detectives in charge of their children's murder investigations and have some very productive conversations, and it put faces to the work on both sides. And it was extremely interesting to see the condition that the Philadelphia detectives are working in. Someone remarked that it was like the Barney Miller show, that it was very 1970s. So that was very interesting for everybody to see. Sadly, there were a lot of tragedies in June. On the 14th, we had 2 mass shootings. The one in Alexandria where Representative Scalise was shot, and one at a UPS station. We worked on awareness there as well, and while these shootings attracted national attention, we know that most mass shootings are domestic violence incidents that don't get as much attention, nor do the individual shootings that occur in America every day, or the 93 individual shootings that occur in America. Also in June, moms participated in Disarm Hate Week. There was a rally in Philly that some members attended. A few of us joined the New York chapter and marched in their Pride Parade. I was one of them. That was a very good time. New Jersey had several events. And we had last week moms at the Phillies, so a bunch of us went with the red shirts again, and we got a sign, one of the signs to light up as well for Moms Demand Action, and we went there en masse to a Phillies game to, again, raise awareness. Those are the reasons that I volunteer with moms. There's one other big reason that I volunteer with Moms Demand Action. I like to be right. I really, really like to be right. And working to keep Americans safe from a public safety crisis feels right. And working with this group of people feels right. And addressing this from different domains feels right. And 20 years from now, when these fatality numbers are much lower, and we know that they can be, it will feel right to know that we dove in, showed up, and persevered on the right side of history. And I have reference information, details. I have postcards for concealed carry. I'm open to questions if anybody has any questions about moms nationally or in Philadelphia. Yes.
Okay, I'm sitting here and I'm so frustrated because how I hear that all these things have been going on. I have been trying to get involved with a gun advocate, a control advocacy group for I don't know how long.
And you haven't
all I
heard from
ever
us?
get are, like when you talked about the school, like then the internet needs to be updated because I've been signing pledges all week on, you know, the schools in guns situation and the Brady group. And every town for gun safety is still saying that you have more current information that is going to come across the internet. And what I want to say is, how do I go somewhere? How do I get involved? Because I'm not a Facebook person. I'm trying it. It's like, I'm old and I don't know how to get on and see all the groups. And every time I get on, the event was yesterday.
All right,
It was
you give me
3
your
months
email.
ago. Are you meeting in Collingswood? And is it in the where is it?
Yeah, the
And
library
the
next.
first,
yeah,
because
first-
I will
first
rearrange my
Thursday.
trip to Florida to go.
I
the first
am
week of
only
September.
in Philadelphia. I do know New Jersey though, and I know one of the people who lives in Collingswood, and I will text her in
Yeah, the
a few
first-
minutes and ask
yeah.
her when the next meeting is.
The first Thursday of every month in Collingswood's library at 7 p.m. Yeah,
It's definitely in the library.
yeah, definitely in the library, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Now you have friendlier legislators in New Jersey, though. So I don't know I don't think that you have the guns in school bill pending. Do you?
All I saw today, I saw a lot of things about things that are just passed. I wrote down some stats and what people are working on, and all the information I saw was that, you know, many groups are working against carry, and I have what you spoke about, the educators
Oh, okay.
you know, letter from Moms Demand Action. So I don't know about, like I said, when I try to get involved, I don't know what group to attend to really be articulate and you know, currently up to date on what's going on. I just know it comes across, you know, my email.
Okay.
So I don't, the latest thing in New Jersey, I can tell you there's no group to meet with ceasefire because I've called Philadelphia. I've tried to get in touch with people. There's no group in Philadelphia that's under the title of ceasefire.
Ceasefire PA is they're not grassroots. They'll kind of give you a heads up that there's a rally. You might get an email that there's a rally coming up. I think that I have a little handout that has like actions to take, bills to watch. They are planning to do in Pennsylvania a rally for universal background checks with the Pennsylvania PAUBC. It's called Pennsylvania for Universal Background Checks. They're going to do several rallies around Pennsylvania. The first one in Bucks County, I believe, is October 29th, but I don't know the location for that yet. And I think that Shira from Ceasefire is the one that's in charge of that. And that's the other thing we do. It is a pretty small world. We work pretty closely with Ceasefire. We work closely with Delco United. We also, there's a group in Chester County, Gun Sense Chester County, which I was actually a member of that for a long time before I became a member of Moms. They are much more active now than they used to be. They weren't very active for a while, which is how I got started with Moms. And when they started getting active again, they kind of came to all of us that were involved.
It seemed to me like today the Brady group was working on legislation that's ultimately like a restraining order that would be federal legislation to get against people who are in crisis, the way they put it, because they are the people that end up committing suicide or harming somebody else. So it would be like a restraining order, and that's what the Brady group is currently,
Okay.
you know, out there is to sign. So, yeah, I would be just really interested in anything I can, because when you physically attend, you get more information.
Right.
You know people who feel the same way.
Well, and I think that that's really comforting, right? Because
Yeah,
honestly, like when I
like-minded people.
came walking through Philly with this shirt, I had a sweater over it because I never know.
Exactly.
You know, I've been out with this shirt and I've had people come up and cheer and thank me for volunteering, and then I've had a couple people call me a communist. So far, that's as bad as it's gotten, but you never know.
There's crazy people out there.
Well, and that was actually in the State House. You know, when I was headed into Harrisburg, I was going through the metal detector, and the gentleman was like, "Oh, you have to get me out of this crowd of communists." So, you know, and then we marched through Wear Orange with Delco United, and we marched through media, and this woman had had a few drinks and started screaming at me that I didn't know what I was talking about, which was kind of funny because we had talked about survivors, et cetera, and these two gentlemen actually were like, "Lady, you're the one that doesn't know what you're talking about. Like, this is a survivor, and have a little respect." It was very nice. It was very chivalrous. It was, you know, really lovely. But again, you know, people are screaming in the streets at you, and that's the thing that's interesting about this particular issue, right? We can all protest. We all have the right to free speech. That's fine. It's extremely intimidating with this cause because the other side is armed. If you're walking down the street in a peaceful protest, and there's counter protesters, they're screaming at you while they have automatic weapons strapped across them. And that it can be a little intimidating. I feel like we lose a lot of people that are interested because of that. I will say that over the past few years, that's gotten less and less. It's not really good press to be seen waving a gun in the face of an unarmed woman. You know, there was some bad press for some of those people from that. But I can definitely make sure that you get connected with the group in Collingswood.
But it's interesting that you are a gun owner, your family, and it makes it very credible, because what I hear, and recently brought up in a writing group I go to, well, if you know, people automatically assume it's like, take our guns away. And that's the argument that people will proceed with. And it's interesting that you started with it, you're a gun owner, because it's like, well, if we don't have a gun, somebody breaks into the house, we'll be unarmed. And that's right where people go. And the school, I don't even know where that came from, because common sense will tell you that it seemed to me like, from what I read today, that they wanted teachers and the school police to be armed, from what I was reading, the NRA.
Teachers, some states.
In some states, and Pennsylvania is one of them. And I can tell you where that comes from. In some rural areas, the response time for first responders is long. You know, they don't have, I believe in urban areas, in my neighborhood, I think it's 6 minutes, the response time, if you dial 911. But in some rural areas, they don't have as many municipalities, they don't have as many first responders, a lot of them are volunteers, so they have a much longer response time. So the theory was that if there was an emergency, it would take law enforcement a long time to get there, so it would be better for teachers to be armed. My argument towards that is, if the teacher shoots somebody, you still have to call the first responder. So why don't we fix that problem instead of arming teachers?
There's another argument from a mental health perspective, and then I'll just let other people speak. You're assuming that someone who is carrying a gun will have the mental capacity to use it correctly in a crisis.
That's my next.
That
right.
is your argument.
Yeah.
When people say to me, I don't want to be unarmed, you know, I remember my first paper I did back to school, where statistically speaking, the person that usually gets killed is the person who has a gun and pulls it on a person who really knows how to use it. But there's this mentality, like, if I have a gun, I'm going to be safe. And mentally, it's like whenever I take a CPR course, I'm always thinking, could I do this? Could I do this? Or the person's going to die. It's the same with a gun. You could go through gun training, but how many people can really logically, calmly utilize a gun and aim to hit the target that you're trying to hit? So it's a ludicrous argument, in my opinion.
I agree with you. And we know that in situations where there have been mass shootings and someone has been armed, they've not drawn their weapons because they were afraid that they were going to shoot an innocent person. or they were afraid that they were going to be assumed to be the shooter and they didn't want to get shot by the SWAT team, and I believe that the number is less than 7% of people are able to defend themselves with a weapon if they get assaulted, and many more people end up having the weapon used against them, or they accidentally shoot a family member that comes home in the middle of the night or comes in the house when they're not expected. Or themselves. Or if you're, and this is why we have Be Smart, and I think in the current political climate that nothing's more important than the safe gun storage thing, because we do have one toddler, we have one homicide by toddler a year in America, or a week in America, and thousands of kids go to the hospital because they were shot, and a lot of those are accidents because people didn't lock up their weapons, and it's people that think that they're responsible and know that what they're doing and it would never happen to them, and then their child finds a weapon.
How do you lock up your weapons? I mean, is it a special dedicated case?
Yes, and they're unloaded. And then this group is one thing because you guys don't all live on my street, but I tend not to share that information all the time, partly because we have a lot of young teenage boys in my neighborhood, and suicide is one of the leading causes of death, and I don't really want to give them a roadmap if that's what they want to do.
Yes,
Do you use your gun for hunting? Is that what you have?
My son is a hunter, but he's more of an archery hunter. He has shot with gone hunting with a weapon. Mostly they're target practice because my family came from the hunting culture. There's not as much time for it as there used to be. We do have a freezer full of venison and turkey.
Oh, boy.
I mean, there's I have a lot of family members that live in very rural places where having a firearm is not uncommon at all. Again, they're not people who would ever keep it lying around loaded. And my family was never a group of people that thought that that the first thing that they should have for protection is a handgun. I mean, that's never been anything that
What's the story about open carry? Has that always been the case, or is only the case in some parts of the country? Or
it's in some
it
parts
used to be
of the
illegal,
country.
didn't it? Or,
It's
and also the power of the guns. I mean,
it's a state by state
yeah,
regulation.
right.
I don't know every state. I know that as we talked about, Texas is open carry.
Well, a lot of rural states and southern states have open carry.
Right, we have open carry in Pennsylvania, but not in Philadelphia, which has been a tricky issue because
To be open carry, do you have to have a license to carry? Or
No.
how does it- you can,
To open carry, no, you don't
you
have to
own a
have
gun,
a
you
license.
can carry it around.
In Pennsylvania, you have to have a license to have a handgun.
Right.
But if you have a rifle, it's like a hunting rifle, you don't necessarily
Or an
have
assault
to have.
rifle.
or
You
an
can
ass-
carry
You
an
can
assault
carry
rifle
that.
into the demonstration.
Into the demonstration.
And that's free speech, right? To
And
carry an assault rifle in a
There is a lot of
demonstration.
debate about that.
I mean, that's just insanity. I mean,
I agree with you,
how
that's
did,
why I
how did
wanted
this
to-
country get to that point?
The most update I wrote down, and that's every town from gun safety, is Virginia is one of 45 states that allows open carry of semi-automatic weapons. So apparently 45 states
Pretty widespread.
Right.
yeah.
allow it.
45 states.
It said that's what I was
Semi-automatic.
taking notes.
Semi-automatic.
Semi-automatic. Virginia is.
Only
It's
five.
indistinguishable from
Only
infantry gun.
Why
only
not go for a
5
machine
states
gun?
don't. Yeah.
It's indistinguishable from infantry. The New York Times had a picture of a kid from the left-wing group she was cradling what looked to be an automatic rifle. Not saying she did anything with it, she didn't, but both sides had guns that looked like automatic rifles in Charlottesville.
But surely the police are worried about that. I mean, having all these
yeah.
people out on the street with automatic weapons.
Well, the police
Aren't the police worried about
Yes.
this?
Very much.
Of course they
Yes,
are.
very
We
much
know
so.
that,
Yeah.
right. we
Don't
know
they
that
oppose it? I mean,
They
Don't the
do.
police oppose it?
I don't think so.
90% of Americans believe that we should have universal background checks, for one thing. 90% of Americans believe that we should have universal background checks. 80+% of NRA members believe that there should be universal background checks, but we have not been able to get them. But for open carry, we're finding that law enforcement are not big fans of open carry. And I tend to ask every police officer I meet what they think, because I want to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. And most of them will say, no, we don't like open carry, but don't come for my guns. I'm like, I'm not coming for anybody's guns ever.